There has been some confusion as to testing for COVID-19. Now, first, let's understand that there are two types of testing that are out there right now. One is testing for the presence of the virus. The other is testing for the presence of antibodies. I won't be discussing the antibody testing because that's still very much in its formative stages with regard to the research. But we do need to talk about testing for the presence of the virus. As I've said in other statements, that the incubation period for the virus is 14 days, up to 14 days. So it at times does not make sense to go and be tested for the virus during those 14 days because the viral load in the body may not be sufficient enough to trigger a positive test. However, recently the CDC has changed its guidelines to recommend that even people that are quarantined for 14 days because of an exposure do get testing if the availability of testing in their area allows for it. Because what they're trying to capture are those folks that are asymptomatic carriers. And yes, there is a little bit of a risk with having the test done before the viral load is sufficient to trigger a positive test. But if at some point during those 14 days one does get tested, that will provide some valuable information, especially if it's positive, because now you know you're a carrier if you're positive, but also if it's negative, that allows for somewhat of a surveillance to occur in the community. So, when to get tested? During the quarantine period to identify whether or not the virus is present. That's one time. The other time is when you're symptomatic. So if the virus is sufficient enough, the viral load in one's body to produce symptoms, it should be sufficient enough to trip or trigger a positive test. So anytime that a person is symptomatic, they should be tested. And if it's positive, you'll know that it's COVID-19. If it's negative, you'll know that the symptoms are from something else. Now again, this is a rapidly evolving situation, so with regard to testing, please make sure you visit the CDC website for further guidance. They have some very quick menus that you can walk through different scenarios because, again, this is changing rapidly.